In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to solve absolute value equations, or equations that contain an absolute value symbol somewhere within them. Remember, absolute value is the distance between a number and 0 on the number line. For example, if we have the absolute value of 15, well, 15 is 15 units away from 0. So the absolute value of 15 is 15. The absolute value of negative 15. Well, how far away is negative 15 from 0? Negative 15 is 15 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of negative 15 is also 15. An absolute value equation looks something like this. The absolute value of x equals 15. In other words, what number is 15 units away from 0? Well, there's two possibilities. The absolute value of 15 gave us 15, and the absolute value of negative 15 gave us 15. So this equation actually has two possible solutions. The numbers that are 15 units away from 0 are negative 15 and positive 15. If we have positive and negative of the same number, we can write it as a single statement. X equals plus or minus, or positive or negative, 15. That says that you have the positive version and the negative version. There are several steps for writing an absolute value equation and solving it. We'll go through those steps as we look at our examples. In our first example, we want the absolute value of some number equals 3. When we solve absolute value equations, the first thing we do is make sure that the absolute value is alone on one side of the equal sign. Once it is, we're going to write two separate equations. We'll drop the absolute value sign, and we'll take the right-hand side just as it is. X equals 3. For our second equation, once again, we get rid of the absolute value sign, but we change what's on the other side to negative. So x is positive 3 or negative 3. Now, we always have to check to make sure we don't have a false solution or an extraneous solution. We use the original equation that they gave us before we did any work. So in this case, we're going to take the absolute value of x equals 3, plug the numbers into them, and make sure that they work. Because both solutions worked, we have x is positive 3 and x is negative 3. This is a very simplistic example to kind of illustrate how you work with these. Example 2 is similarly simplistic. Please pause the video here and then come on back and let's check your work. We have the absolute value of y equals 15. The absolute value is by itself on one side, so we drop the absolute value sign and we have y equals 15, y equals negative 15. Remember, we go through and we have to check to make sure that our solution works. I do that by plugging my solutions into the original equation that was given to us before we did any work at all. We plug in 15 and we end up with 15 equals 15. That works. We plug in negative 15, we end up with 15 equals 15. That also works. And so my solution is plus or minus 15. Example 3 has a little bit more going on. The first thing we do is look to make sure that the absolute value is alone. On the left-hand side, notice there's nothing outside of the absolute value symbols. That's good. To write our two equations, what we'll do is we'll take the x minus 4 and we'll put it equal to 3. For our second equation, we'll take the x minus 4 and we'll put it equal to negative 3. Now we go through and we solve each of the equations. On the first one, we get x equals 7. On the second one, we get x equals 1. These are our possible solutions. Remember, we have to check for extraneous solutions or solutions that don't work. When we do that, we plug into the original equation that was given to us. Absolute value of x minus 4 equals 3. Now plug in the answers. We got the first one was 7, the second one was 1. Go through and make sure that they work. In this case, they both checked out. And so our solutions are x equals 1 and x equals 7. Example 4 is just like this. Please take a moment to pause the video and give this a try. Write both of your equations, solve them, and then remember to check to make sure that your solutions actually do work. Please pause the video here, then come on back when you're done. We'll take a look at your work. Let's see how you did. Our two equations are 5 minus 2m equals 1 and 5 minus 2m equals negative 1. That gave us m equals 2 and m equals 3. I have to do my check, and I do that by plugging my solutions into the original equation. In this case, both of them worked, and so my solutions are m equals 2 and m equals 3. In example 5, we have to begin by looking and seeing something a little bit different here. Notice that the absolute value is x plus 4, but it's not alone. Right outside of it on that same side of the equal sign is a minus 2. We can't do anything until the absolute value is all alone. So we'll begin by adding 2 to both sides. That gives us x plus 4 equals 8. Now I can write my two equations. X plus 4 equals 8. X plus 4 equals negative 8. Once I do that, I go through and I solve my equations. X equals 4. X equals negative 12. Finally, I'll check by plugging that into the original equation, seeing if they work. The first one does. The second one does. And so my solutions are x equals 4 and x equals negative 12. On example 6, I'm going to just get you started a little bit and then leave the rest for you to do. Again, we need to make sure our absolute value is alone, but notice it's not. We have the absolute value of x minus 4 minus 3x. We need to get that 3x to the other side. So we begin by adding 3x to both sides. That gives us the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 3x plus 6. Now I do what I've always done. I write my two equations. The first one, x minus 4, equals 3x plus 6. The second one, x minus 4, equals, and we would take the negative of what's on the right-hand side. When we do the negative, we have to distribute the negative to all the things that are over there. So it's the negative of 3x plus 6. Now you can go ahead, distribute that negative, solve both of the equations, and then check to see if your solutions are valid. Please pause the video here, solve each of those equations, and perform the check. Find out if there are any solutions or what the solutions are to this equation. In the first one, we have x equals negative 5. The second one, we have x equals negative 1/2. Now we have to check to see if our solutions work. We check in the first one, and we find out that it does not work. It says 24 equals 6. We know that that makes no sense. No sense, not a solution. So x equals negative 5 is rejected. The second one, we plug into it, and we see that it does work out. 6 equals 6. Since 6 equals 6 is okay, x equals negative 1/2 is a valid solution. And so this equation has only one solution, x equals negative 1/2. For example 7, we'll also get you started. We begin by getting the absolute value alone. We start by subtracting 3 from both sides. That gives us 5 times the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 10. Since it's 5 times the absolute value, we will divide both sides by 5. That leaves us x minus 4 equals 2. Now, please write your two equations, solve, and then check to see if your solutions work. Please pause the video here. Our two equations are x minus 4 equals 2 and x minus 4 equals negative 2. That means our solutions are possibly x equals 6 and x equals 2. We then perform our check to verify that they do work. In this case, both of them did. So our solutions are x equals 2 and x equals 6. In summary, this is what you need to know about absolute value. Number one, absolute value is the distance that a number lies from 0 on the number line. If you have an equation involving absolute value, there's a nice trick we can use to solve that equation. First, get the absolute value alone on one side. Then, we're going to write our two separate equations without the absolute value symbols. One equals the positive of the right-hand side, one equals the negative of the right-hand side. Then, we'll solve each of the equations and be sure to check for extraneous roots. Sometimes you'll get a solution that doesn't work and you'll have to reject it. This is everything you need to know about working with absolute value equations.